part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hey, what's good, everyone? Welcome to Sabol Brothers on the Baseline Podcast, part of the Press Play Podcast Network. I'm John Sabol.
And I'm Scott Sabol.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. We have a special guest today, a former Cleveland Browns player that is kind of really, I would like to say, a man that has racked up so many stats in the receiving core of his career with the Browns that he sometimes, I think, gets overlooked. He was before my time in terms of watching him, and he is a man that has really stuck around the game in many different ways. Of course, we're talking about former Cleveland Browns wide receiver Dave Logan.
Absolutely. And it's funny because I was just old enough to remember the last couple of years of his career in the early 80s. And I remember, and I had to throw this out because it got so old. I had a poster. It was a Dave Logan poster. It was like a pencil sketch. I might have got it at McDonald's or somewhere. Mom and dad probably got it for me. Mm-hmm. And it was him, making a catch over a defender. And I just remember that when we finally got Dave Logan on for our podcast. I'm like, wait, I remember this. It was like, like a mini poster. Wish I still had it, but it was falling apart 20 years ago. But yeah, Dave Logan, I remember that distinctly back in like maybe 81, 82.
So what you're saying is your Brian Sight poster that you had for years that was falling apart that you had in the frame lasted longer than that one?
Well, yeah, the Brian Sight poster did. It was bigger, but that's a whole nother story we'll get to later on. Let's just put it this way. It was either me or my wife, and I had to get rid of the poster.
Yeah, it was time to go.
It's a touchy subject. Yeah,
time to let go.
Right.
Dave Logan is a guy who is in the broadcasting field, just like we are out in Denver, a sports radio host, and also and I didn't know this actually, Scott. I didn't know he was is still the play-by-play radio guy for the Broncos. So he has the pulse of current NFL. He still keeps tabs on the Browns. We're going to get into all of that. His take on the Browns. We're going to go back in time and relive Red Right 88. Unfortunately, I know it's still hurts and stings for some Browns fans, but
big sports fan though, all across the board, football, basketball, baseball.
Yeah. And an interesting stat about that when you mentioned all those three sports regarding Dave Logan,
which I didn't know.
Yeah. And I didn't know that either until we looked it up, and I was like, whoa, pretty cool. We're going to get to that point in our interview with Dave Logan coming up right after the break.
The R&R podcast going to be rocking and rolling with you because football season is underway. College, Ohio State, the Power Fives, the MAC, the Browns. Michael Regai, are you ready to rock and roll with some football?
Kenny, I've been ready. This is our time of year. This is what R&R is all about. We're going to be with you every week. Kenny just said it. Browns, NFL, Ohio State centric. So you got to stay with us all fall and winter long here on R&R.
That's right. The Regai and Rhoda podcast coming to you here on the Press Play Podcast Network. Subscribe now and don't miss a show.
Hey everyone, I'm Holly Wetzel.
And I'm Jeremy Powell.
And we are your hosts of The Orange is Oranger, a Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. We give you all the dog pound coverage that you'll need each week to get you ready for kickoff and beyond.
Don't miss our breakdowns of each week's matchups, game recaps, and any and all news out of Berea to feed your Browns appetite. As we all know, Holly, dogs got to eat.
That's right, Jeremy. Hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode of the Orange is Oranger Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break, NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break, NBA podcast.
Thousand-yard rusher there, a very heady player and a good receiver. He wears 35. Going for Logan. He's open. He's got a touchdown. Dave Logan, a gifted receiver, beat Aaron Kyle in the corner, and right on target was Brian Sight. Now this is Monday Night Football. Dave Logan.
Well, everyone, our guest currently co-hosts the Logan and Lewis Sports Talk Show weekdays from 9 to 12 on KOA News Radio, 850 AM. He's the Denver Broncos play-by-play announcer, as well as a high school football coach. Our guest is former Browns wide receiver Dave Logan. Dave, you're a busy man, and from what I read, you've kept the schedule going for a long time. Thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
My pleasure, guys. Doing well. Good to talk with you guys.
Yeah, Dave, you're a busy man, but let's go back to the beginning. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Denver. Yeah, I'm a Denver native. My parents moved here. My dad was born and raised here. I actually was born in Fargo, but then we moved back to Denver before I was 1 year old, and so that's where I grew up.
A lot of our younger listeners, Dave, may not realize this, but you have an interesting historical background in terms of not just your playing career, but a great trivia question that I'm sure anybody who ever get this at bar trivia would love to know the answer to. Is you're one of only three people other than Dave Winfield and Mickey McCarty to be drafted in the NFL, NBA, and Major League Baseball. You were drafted by the Kings and the Reds. That is unreal if you think about it, especially in this day and age. When you hear that and when you reflect on those times there, that's got to be pretty remarkable in your eyes, right?
Yeah, you know what, I just enjoyed, I really enjoyed just whatever sport I was playing. I started really early, had two really supportive parents. And I mean, when football was done, I couldn't wait to get a basketball. And when basketball was done, I was ready to go to baseball. And it was just sort of ingrained in me at a really young age, right? I didn't have a lot of time off, which is probably good for a young guy because you can get in a lot of trouble if you have too much idle time. But I you know, I always had this competitive thing. I always wanted to try to get better. I always tried to find a way to win whatever we were doing. And I was just fortunate. I loved all three sports. Played two sports in college. And, you know, honestly, I thought about the basketball thing. I had broken my ankle playing basketball about 3 weeks before the NFL draft. And I think it knocked me down some because I was still, you know, back then, even though I had the surgeons send letters to the teams, back then injuries were not as they are now. And so I think there was some doubt in terms of my availability. But I thought about giving basketball a shot. I really love basketball, but I also love football, and it worked out well for me.
So what made you pick football over baseball then? I know basketball knocked you out because of the injury.
Yeah, the baseball thing, I got drafted right out of high school. And back in the day, they've since changed this rule, but back in the day, if you signed a professional baseball contract, you couldn't play any sport at all in college, right? And so I knew I wanted to go to school. I knew I wanted to participate in sports. I knew I was going to play football for sure. I was going to play basketball for sure. I would not. I wouldn't go to a college that would not have let me play both. That's sort of old school and not done too much anymore. But that was really important to me. So I just knew that I wasn't going to sign that baseball contract and not have any ability to play sports in college whatsoever.
So, Dave, when you look at the list of Browns receivers, you know, you're in the top 10 in receiving yards, among other, statistics. When you look at the Browns list, among all the other individual accomplishments, when you look back at your career, what jumps out at you the most with what you did here in Cleveland during the late 70s and early 80s?
Oh, wow. That's a tough question. I played with some really good players and good dudes, right? And we developed a real sense, a real belief in our ability to win games, no matter what that might look like during the course of the game. And it was really a three-year buildup. It was 78, 79, and 80. We were fortunate in that time that the core group of guys stayed together, and for the most part, relatively injury-free. And so we had guys that every single week were going out and making plays and winning games. And, that can become very addictive. You can get very used to just having a real confidence level that you can win in that fashion. And so I think back to that. I think how great the city was and the fans in Cleveland, man, some of the best fans in the world. And, they enjoyed that ride. It was an up and down ride, mostly up, some downs, but just the guys in general, just a great group of players and men that I had the fortune of working with.
We had your teammate Greg Pruitt on the podcast a couple months ago. He told us what he remembered about the infamous and dreadful Red Right 88. He said he was on the sidelines talking to teammates, already planning on where to go to celebrate after the game because, the Browns were on the cusp of winning. You were on the field during that play, and I believe, if my research was correct, you were the primary receiver in that play design.
Correct.
Walk us through what happened in your eyes. I know it's kind of hard all these years later.
Oh no, it's not. No, it's not hard. That's forever going to be in my memory, unfortunately. No, listen, it was a bitterly cold day. I mean, it was so cold, and I grew up obviously in Denver, and we get our fair share of cold weather there, and played in Cleveland for a long time, and you get really cold days there. But that was unlike anything that I've ever played in, never been in since. And the kicking game was obviously a problem that day. The field was completely frozen. You couldn't feel. I mean, you literally couldn't feel your hands. I came out to warm up, and I had just the normal spikes on that I normally wore, and came out and slipped and fell coming out of the dugout at the old Municipal Stadium, and had to go back and put turf shoes on. I couldn't stand up with turf shoes either, and I wound up wearing a pair of broom ball shoes, which I'd never even heard of. They had suction cups on the bottom of the shoes, but it was. I mean, the conditions were really, really tough. So you fast forward, I mean, again, that was a year that sort of culminated the previous 2 years with that game. We always felt like we were going to find a way to win that game. I mean, we just, they went for it on fourth down late in the game. If they get that fourth down deep in our territory, the game's probably over. They don't get it. And so we drive the length of the field, and we've got the ball down there, certainly on a normal day, well within Don Cockroft's range. They were down 14-12. And so there was a timeout on the field, and we're huddling on the sideline, and we decide that we're going to try to go for it. And I knew the play call. I knew I was the primary receiver, and Sam had said, hey, if Dave's not open, throw it in Lake Erie. And I think it was a case just where, Brian had been so good that entire year. He was the MVP of the league. And I think he saw a window where he might have been able to fit the ball into Ozzie. And, it just didn't work. I mean, the ball was intercepted. Ironically, the guy who intercepted the ball was a college teammate of mine at the University of Colorado. And he has since passed. And so I say this respectfully, but Mike Davis, Mike was a great athlete, guy that could really run, big hitter, but he couldn't catch the ball if you stood in front of him and underhanded it to him from about 10 yards. And here he is making this interception when it was 40 some below zero. So yeah, it was, that was about as quiet as I ever remember Memorial Municipal Stadium getting. And it went from really loud to really quiet just in the snap of a finger.
So you've been handling the play-by-play duties for the Broncos, for about 25 years, right? Since 96. And, when you think about it, you're one of the only former NFL players who have become a play-by-play broadcaster that doesn't do the color commentary. We've seen Tony Romo do the color commentary. How did you get involved in broadcasting? And it seems like, you're the sky's the limit, even today.
Well, you know what? I wasn't real sure. I got traded from the Browns to the Broncos, and then I was released midway through the season. And at that point, I wasn't real sure what I was going to do. I had a couple of chances to continue my career. I was in my 10th year, and my body was in relatively good shape. And so I just decided that I'd had enough. And the baseball coach at the University of Colorado, Irv Brown, called me and asked me what I was going to do, and I didn't know. And he said, "Hey, why don't you try a talk show?" So I didn't know any better. So I did. and I love sports, right? I'm a sports nerd. I'm a guy that if there's a football game on, it doesn't matter what the game is, who's playing, whatever. I'm watching every single play. Same with basketball, and I love baseball too. And so from that point on, it just sort of developed. Started doing radio and TV in Denver. I did the Nuggets television package for 4 or 5 years, and then the flagship station of the Broncos called and asked if I would be interested in joining them. That was back in 1990, and I started in the color analyst role at that point. So I did 5 years as color analyst, and then they decided they wanted me to switch to play-by-play, which, you know, as you said, most players don't get that opportunity, right? They just, I mean, you're sort of, as a player, former player, you're sort of pigeonholed into the color analyst role. So, gosh, I was really humbled, and I wanted to make sure that I did a good job, because I knew how big a move that really was, and the scrutiny that would come with it. And so as you said, I've been the play-by-play guy since 1996, and going into this year is my 32nd year on the broadcast team.
Wow. Is it still weird? I know it's been a long time, you know, since your playing career, but is it still weird to broadcast a game when the Broncos are playing the Browns? Do you still have that sense of, man, I'm broadcasting for the Broncos, but man, the Browns, I still have a soft side on that side. Is it still a little odd?
Oh, listen, I mean, it's the 32nd year I've called Broncos games, and I'm from Denver, and I grew up a Broncos fan. But, you know, the heart and soul of my career was in Cleveland. So I never, ever, ever root against the Browns. I mean, the Browns, you know, I would have no interest. I've broadcast Super Bowls. I've been fortunate enough to call 4 Super Bowl games. But, you know, whenever the time comes that I decide to retire from that job, I would have no interest in going to a Super Bowl and watching the game unless the Browns were in that game. Now, if the Browns ever find themselves in the Super Bowl, I will find a way to get to that game, because that's, you know, blood, sweat, and tears for a long time back there. And that would just be an awesome experience.
It must have been really interesting too, when the Browns and the Broncos, you know, were playing, what is that, 2-3 years in a row in the AFC Championship game in the mid-late 80s. That must have been pretty cool for you to watch, because again, of your allegiance to both.
Well, at that point, see, I wasn't calling Broncos games, so I was rooting, even here in Denver, like crazy for the Browns. Right? I mean, all those guys that were in those games, not all of them, but a lot of those guys were my former teammates. And you know, I played for Marty. Marty was the defensive coordinator with the Browns, and he was the head coach then. And you know, I knew Bernie really well, and Brian Brennan, and you know, some of those guys. So no, that was no issue at all. I was pulling for Cleveland to find a way to win all those games.
So Dave, when you were playing with the Browns in 1976 to 83, and then that 1 year with the Broncos in 84, I mean, you rocked an impressive mustache during your playing career. I'm sure you probably get asked a lot about it. Now, I see here on the Zoom call, you got a nice 5 o'clock shadow beard going on here. I mean, your mustache was great. Tom Selleck would be jealous. It was that good. Have you ever thought about bringing it back all these years later?
No, listen, man, you know, we used to call it the porn stash, right? So that thing, you know, I could hide jelly beans in that thing, right? It was thick. But I kept that for a long time. And, you know, I finally shaved it on Easter Sunday when my daughter, who is now in her 30s, was like 5 years old. And she walked into the bathroom, and she was startled because she didn't know who was standing in the bathroom. It was not her dad, right? No mustache. And so I haven't had a mustache since. So it's been, you know, 28, 29 years. So I may leave the shadow for a little bit, but I think the stash is gone forever.
Do you have a chance to watch any Browns games? Do you ever, even though I know you're busy with covering the Broncos, but do you ever have a chance, especially when they're out on TV on the West Coast?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. We I mean, fortunately here in Denver, most of the games, in fact, all of them here in Denver start at 2:00, which is 4:00 back in Cleveland. And a lot of times the Browns will play in that early window. So we have from the stadium, I get to the stadium about 4 hours before kickoff, and we'll always be able to find whatever game. And I'm always watching the Browns and have watched them, the development with Kevin Stefanski, and I've watched Baker and sort of what they're doing. I know they're right now struggling in a lot of areas, especially with COVID. But, I think the nucleus of that team is in place. I mean, I like their offensive line. I like those two backs. I like what they want to do on offense. And so I think they're headed in the right direction. I don't know that they'll get there this year, but I do like what they've accomplished so far.
And as we record this year on December 15th, the Browns have a major COVID outbreak, and that will obviously impact their game this weekend against the Raiders. You talk a little bit about this current team and that you do like the makeup of it. You like what they're doing on offense. The big topic of discussion is Baker Mayfield. In your opinion, Dave, is he the long-term solution at quarterback in Cleveland?
Listen, I like him a lot. I think I've seen him play when he plays really well. I think, and this would be no great secret, I think he's got to have the right pieces around him. I think he's got to have, a real good running game. I think he's a play action guy and a guy that has the ability to move. I mean, Kevin moves him out of the pocket on the boots, things like that. To me, that's what he really does well. I don't know. There are very few guys in the league, and there were very few guys back when I played, that can sit in the pocket. And when the other team knows you have to throw the ball, you get involved in some sort of drop back game and throw it 40 to 50 times. I mean, those guys are rare, and I don't think that really fits Baker's style. But I am a believer in Baker Mayfield in terms of, I look at it, can we win with that guy? And I think the answer is yes, you can. You just have to have the right pieces around him. And he's got to be healthy. It's clear to me this year he's not healthy. He's tough as hell. He's trying to play through a number of injuries. I don't know ultimately if that's a smart thing or not. But, I like him. I think they can win with him.
Would you give him that contract extension at the end of the year, or would you like to see him perform consistently healthy next season?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think if I'm running the team, and I'm not completely aware of all the Browns' finances, so I don't know how much cap room they have and things like that. To answer your question, I think it would depend on what that number is and what Baker's people are talking about. Mm-hmm. It's tough to find, again, elite quarterbacks, guys that no matter what sort of the system looks like, that guy can elevate everybody else and you're going to win games with. Most, even really good quarterbacks, are complementary guys, or guys that, are good leaders, or guys that you count on, or guys that are tough, guys that know when to throw the football and where to throw it. They're accurate with their throws. So, if I could get him for the right price in the right number of years, sure. But I think, that part of that's going to depend on, what Baker's camp really is looking for in terms of money and years.
So, Dave, Greg Pruitt and Eric Metcalf, as well as former Indian Ron Pruitt, who was a catcher for the Indians back in the 70s, they shared some funny stories about their time at the old Municipal Stadium because, even by the 70s and 80s, it was getting old. It was starting to get run down. Do you have any interesting Cleveland Municipal Stadium stories for us, some behind-the-scenes stuff, something weird that might have happened to you or the team back then?
Oh, man. Weird stories. There was such a big rivalry with the Steelers. And, that was back. I missed the first part of their Super Bowl run, but I got the last part. They won 4 Super Bowl championships in 6 years. I think it was the most dominant run in the NFL history. And you look at their team now, I think of the 22 starters, 10 of those guys are in the Hall of Fame. And yet, you know what? In that 3-year period, maybe even 4-year period, we thought we could beat them every single time we played them. We gave them respect, but we didn't fear them. We didn't. They just physically beat the hell out of most everybody they played, and the rules were different back then. And as a receiver, especially, when you went across the middle of the field, there was a price to pay. And so you were either up to the task and you were willing to sacrifice that and jump into the fray, or they'd run you out of the league. But I remember one game, and I think it was a game in Cleveland, clearly. And I don't remember what month. It was a game that I think we came back I know we came back to win, and it was either 28-27 or 27-26. I can't remember. We won the game by 1 point. We scored twice in the fourth quarter, and the game basically was over, and we're running the clock out. And so I'm lined up wide. I mean, we're in the huddle. We're gonna kill the clock. So I just trot out left, and I'm right in front of the Steelers bench. And Mel Blount, who I've got to know a little bit, the Hall of Fame cornerback, who was just a beast of a player and great guy too. Now that I know him, he's lined up over me, and I hear this voice from the Steelers bench, and the voice is saying, "Kick his ass, Mel. Kick his ass." So I'm thinking, the game's over, man. We're taking a knee. So trot back to the huddle. We're going to snap it one more time, and trot out wide left, and the same thing with a couple of expletives in there. Kick his ass, kick his blanket. But so I looked over the sideline, and I was trying to figure out who was saying it. And I said, "Why don't you come kick my ass?" And as it turned out, it was a Steelers assistant coach that sort of trotted up at the end of the game, and we had to be separated like on the field after we won the game. That's how intense the rivalry was. But I just popped into my mind because it was uncommon. It wasn't uncommon for things like that to be said from the sideline, especially when you played the Steelers. But it was uncommon for an assistant coach when the game is over, we're taking a knee for hollering out to kick my ass. But it worked out. We won the game.
Right. So back then, when when your career was over, and right when you were on your way out of Cleveland and then heading to Denver, did you take something special from Municipal Stadium? I ask this because my brother and I, we grew up here, and so we have a soft spot in our heart for Municipal Stadium. Do you have any items, relics from the old stadium at your house, or is it one of those deals where, I'm just going to put this place behind me?
No, I have two things. I have a little relic of the stadium here that sits on my desk right here, Municipal Stadium. And I also have two of the original seats. I got two seats from Municipal Stadium. I keep them downstairs, kind of in the man cave. But, it was such listen, there was so much history in that stadium. And it impressed me when I first got there as this wide-eyed kid from Colorado, right? I mean, it's like we ride stagecoaches out here or something. But I knew about that stadium. I mean, I knew the history of the stadium and how many great players had played there. The Browns were, the top team for a long time. And so I just had a real respect. And I've always had that for the game and the players and the coaches and just the overall setting of NFL football. So I got two original seats.
That's really cool. I have one and my brother has one too. So that's really
nice.
Neat. Yeah, mine's in my man cave and John's as well. One quick question. You're a high school football coach. How's your team doing? Just tell us a little bit about the team and your history as a football coach before we kind of get into our rapid fire questions and wrap things up.
Yeah. So this is my 29th year. We just finished. We've had a really good run. We were state champions this year. In fact, we've won it the last 3 years, so we had a three-peat here in the top classification in Colorado. I always wanted to give back, and I love football so much, and I also love kids. I've had opportunities to coach in the NFL a couple of times. I really didn't. That's a real lifestyle change. I didn't want to be moving my family all around the country, although the workload and the film I would have embraced all of that. But I can get my fix working with kids that are 16, 17, and 18 years of age, and just very blessed to do so. So, I'm not sure broadcasting wise, we'll go for a little bit longer, but I think coaching will probably be, good Lord willing, the last thing that I back away from.
I'm sure you feel that's a very rewarding experience for you.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Listen, you try to teach these young guys a little bit about football, about the history of the game. You also try to teach them about a little, some life lessons and the ability to deal with adversity. And not giving up and working together towards a common goal and being selfless. I mean, we live in an age now that everybody wants to point at themselves in professional sports, right? It's all about, seemingly, which I think is sad, seems to be all about, look at me, me, me. And football is the greatest team sport in the world. You have to have other guys doing their jobs in order for you to be successful. It's unlike any other sport in that regard. So, to that extent. So, yeah, I enjoy it. I get a lot out of it, and it's been an amazing career.
Yeah, well said, and I completely agree. Before we get into rapid fire, you were mentioning about your relics that you have. You had your 2 stadium seats from Municipal Stadium. Scott and I both have one. And then for our listeners who obviously cannot see us here on a Zoom call, you showed Scott and myself a model of Municipal Stadium, and I certainly have the exact same one here
nice.
too.
Nice.
How about that?
There you go. Yeah, I love it.
Pretty cool. I've got one for actually every Cleveland stadium.
There you go.
Very cool. So we're going to wrap this up real quick, Dave, but we're going to do a little fun little segment we do with all of our guests here. It's a little rapid fire, and they're just fun questions. First answer comes to your mind, just say it. They can be, Browns related or entertainment related or whatever. So we're going to get this started. First, right off the bat, your favorite Browns teammates.
Favorite Browns teammates. Oh man, I've got a lot of them. Brian Sipe, Ozzie Newsome, Doug Deacon, Robert Jackson, Greg and Mike Pruitt, Reggie Rucker, Dick Ambrose, Clarence Scott, Tom Darden, the late Lyle Alzado, to just name a few.
Mm-hmm. List goes on. Wow.
Yeah, right.
What's your favorite Browns memory as a player? When people ask you this, the one that pops into your head.
Oh golly, favorite Browns memory as a player. Wow. Well, we beat the Packers on late in the game in a year. I believe that was 1980. In a year that the Packers weren't really any good, and we were having a big team party after that game. And I remember standing on the sideline because the Packers are ahead late in the game. We're thinking, oh, this is going to be an absolute. We're going to go to Mr. Modell's house, and this is going to be an absolute awful experience. And we broke the huddle late in the game. I think it was a third and long, and I wasn't the primary receiver. And I remember Brian, when I got to the line of scrimmage, he was under center. He looked over at me, just sort of nodded. And I remember thinking, I think that was to me. So I changed the route and just ran a peak, what we call a peak 9 go route. And he put the ball up, and I was fortunate enough to be able to stop and go up and get it. And we scored a touchdown with under 20 seconds to go. So that was a pretty cool memory.
Dave, your favorite restaurant during your playing career in Cleveland, and one that you go to now every few years when the Broncos are in Cleveland?
Oh, golly, man. It's been a long time since I've been in Cleveland. My favorite restaurant in Cleveland would have been it's an Italian restaurant, and I can't think of the name of the damn restaurant. The one I go to now when I'm there, a good friend of mine, Kay Amin, owns several restaurants, and there's a restaurant downtown called the Blue something. Can't think of it.
There's a lot of good restaurants in Cleveland. It's a very underrated food scene, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
A lot of good Italian restaurants as well. What do you have a favorite? I know you're busy, but do you have a favorite TV show you're streaming right now that you watch when you have 20 minutes, a half hour?
During football season, again, I'm a football junkie, but before and after the season, we just finished Narcos, which I thought was great on Netflix. I'm a big Yellowstone guy. I like that. Queen of the South, finished that too. That was good. Lots of mayhem, lots of killing, lots of stuff that I enjoy, but and it was well done, well produced. So that would be it.
You strike me as someone that would like the TV show Ozark. Have you watched it?
Love it.
Yeah, Scott and I both
Ozark.
love that show.
Yep.
Yeah. Are they coming back with one more series, right?
Yeah,
Correct.
one more season.
One more season.
I think in the spring, I believe.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
either like March or April, something like that. Yeah.
Because the ending to last year was like, I couldn't figure out like what the hell's going on here.
I know.
And then they said we're not coming back because of COVID. And then I read somewhere, saw online or something. I'm like, oh, nice, they're coming back for one more season.
They already started shooting it, so they're a lot of it's already in the can and ready to go.
Good deal.
Yeah, a lot of good TV shows coming back this spring, delayed with COVID. All right, a few more questions, Dave, and then we'll let you go. Your favorite Cleveland athlete you met during your time with the Browns that played for the Cavs or maybe even the Indians?
I was a big Cavs fan, obviously. I met Bingo Smith, for sure. I met Austin Carr. Scott Wedman played for the Cavs back in the day. Scotty and I were teammates at the University of Colorado. I played basketball with him, so I enjoyed them when they played out at Richfield. I'm thinking for the Indians, Dwayne Kuiper is a good friend. Kuip's still doing the play-by-play for the Giants, I think,
right,
in Major League Baseball. Yeah, and for the Browns, I think there were so many. What was cool about the Browns, a lot of the old guys would come back and come in the locker room after the game. I mean, Lou Groza, I got a chance to meet him. I met Jim Brown, which was such a thrill for me. And I mean, guys like that, that Milt Morin, who is gone. I mean, he came back. I met Leroy Kelly. It was just really cool for a kid that was an NFL fan growing up to see these guys walk in a locker room was special.
Yeah, that's a solid list right there.
Yeah.
So what's the toughest cornerback or safety you played against?
Well, Mel Blount was a load. And I saw him twice a year. I mean, for whatever reason, at least statistically, I always have my best games against the Steelers, but I mean, it was a physical, you had to really, you had to be prepared to go in, and you knew what you're getting yourself into. I mean, Jack Tatum, who was gone, was a fierce hitter. Jack, I respected Jack because, I mean, he'd hit you like right in the face when you were looking at him. George Atkinson, the other safety, tended to sort of hit you when you weren't looking. And I think Kenny Houston, the early part of my career was the end of Kenny's career. But Kenny, when I first played against him, I couldn't believe how big he was as a safety. Right, he looked like a linebacker. There were some great players that I saw for a long time.
And final question: favorite NFL stadium that is no longer around that you played in, and your current stadium that is a favorite for you as a broadcaster that you go and travel and see. I would assume Municipal Stadium may be one of your favorites, but
Absolutely.
if it's Municipal, give me another one.
Yeah, my favorite stadium is not around would be the stadium that I played in for so many years, right? Municipal Stadium. There was so much history in that stadium, and I can still hear. It's amazing. There was a different roar to that stadium as a player. We played everywhere. We played in Houston, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Oakland. We played everywhere. Yeah. But the crowd noise was different in that stadium. And I don't even know why. Favorite stadium nowadays in terms of broadcasting would be probably the best stadiums in terms of vantage point. I've got a great one in Denver. I mean, I'm right on the 40-yard line, and they haven't yet moved us, up to the top tier so they can sell, more premium seats. So I'd say that the stadium in Denver, Empower Field at Mile High, as far as broadcasting a game, is about as good as you can get.
Well, Dave, that wraps it up. You gave us a lot of great memories here, a lot of great stories, and a lot of great players that we don't think of every day. And then when you bring up those lists, it's like, wow, now I remember that guy. So, Dave, on behalf of my brother John, thank you very much for joining us. And I know you're busy. You got to run to your next engagement, but have a great holiday season.
Hey, thank you guys. My pleasure. And happy holidays to you guys. And anytime.
Thanks, Dave. Take care.
Okay, you guys.
Bye-bye.
Be good.
Well, John, that was fun. That was really fun, especially his recall of Red Right 88 and all of the nuances of the play being on the field and how cold it was and knowing what was going through Sipes' mind. And it kind of puts you, it puts you in the middle of the field. It's really interesting how after 40 years, it's like it happened yesterday.
Well, we had Greg Pruitt on. If listeners haven't had a chance to listen to that podcast, we encourage you to do so. He was a teammate of Dave Logan, and he was on the sidelines of that infamous play. And we got his perspective. And now we got Dave Logan's perspective, a guy where that ball was supposed to go to him. Unfortunately, it was picked off. One thing that I found really interesting about his recollection of that play and about that moment in that day, besides it being so cold, was he had to change out his normal cleats for broom ball shoes.
Yeah, what are those?
Well, when he said that, I was like, broom ball shoes. That the last time I heard broom ball was like an elective class I took at Kent State.
Right,
I didn't take that
exactly. One. Right, no. Now, what was on the bottom of those shoes? He said
suction cups.
Suction cups.
Yeah.
Well, I guess when you have a field that's basically coated in ice, you got to do something.
You got to be Spider-Man out there.
And, exactly. And the other thing too he mentioned was the guy who intercepted the ball. Red Right 88, the interception, was a former college teammate of his, and he said he was a great athlete, but he couldn't catch. He just had no hands. But for whatever reason, he made that interception, and the rest is history. But he had great things to say about him as well.
I think he said his name was Mike Davis. We should know that.
Yes.
Unfortunately, he had passed away recently.
Right.
The other funny thing about that is, Dave's recollection of that day and the sound and the crowd of the old stadium. Everyone that has listened to our podcast, Scott, knows our nostalgia for old venues in Cleveland. And, going there many times as a really young kid, and then you obviously went there more, even younger and older.
Right.
I can only imagine how it was in a big game like that. Of course, there have been many more since then, before obviously the Browns had left. But that was really cool for him to go back in that. And I'm glad I kind of asked him about that mustache too, because
that's classic.
You look at his mustache in those days, man. He called it his porn stash or whatever.
Right.
It was phenomenal.
It seemed like everybody had mustaches like that back in the day. I just saw a picture of our of Dad with a mustache and the sideburns and stuff, and it's like, ooh, I'm like, whoa, you look like you're about 50 and you're 27. But anyway,
what an era! Everyone looked older in the 70s.
Right.
Well, you even go back further. You look at someone in the 50s and they look like they're 100 or something.
Right, exactly. So, but that was really fun. He also talked about, real quick here, and we can wrap this up, how there was that one game, and they're ready to end the game, right? Take a knee, and one of the assistant coaches is yelling, a bunch of trash out from the sideline, and they had to be separated after the game's even over. I mean, it was.
Yeah, that was a Steelers assistant coach, he said.
Yes, it was.
It just goes to show how big that rivalry was back then, and those dominant Steelers teams. And
absolutely.
Yeah, good memories there by Dave Logan. We want to thank him again for coming on. That was just a great wealth of knowledge, and I loved his take on the current Browns too. I think he's spot on in everything he said.
He certainly was. Yeah. And he had to kind of move on from our podcast because he's got a radio show to do, and he's still busy to this day. So he loves keeping his hand in the game, whether it's broadcasting and, of course, as a high school coach. So we want to thank Dave Logan for joining us. You can watch us here. Follow us on Twitter, Sabol Brothers, at Sabol Brothers. You can follow my brother, John_Sabol, and follow myself at Scott Sabol. My name, SCOTTSABOL, FOX8. And you can like and subscribe our podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Well, everybody, another episode in the books. Thank you very much for joining us. John, it's been a pleasure here again today. We got another good episode coming up, hopefully in the next, probably next week.
Keep that subscribe and listening. We appreciate your listenership. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a happy holiday season. Take care.